How you doing, sir? It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Obviously, I'd love to give an introduction to you, but I think you would do a better job. And so, if you could describe a lot of the value that you could bring to the audience, maybe in a little segment, how would you describe yourself, your career, maybe some of the lessons that you've been through?
Okay, thank you, David. I'm happy to be here. Appreciate you reaching out to me. Uh, I guess the best way to introduce myself is I'll just start. I'm Marc Marano. I run a consulting firm called careermarc, and our focus is on helping individuals achieve their potential by helping them build better resumes, better interview skills, and career planning strategies. I've been doing that for a couple of years since I retired. I had a long career at Johnson and Johnson, about 34 years in a variety of different roles with them. They treated me great. It was a great company, but all good things must come to an end. So I retired a couple years ago, and yeah, to help keep myself busy, but also hopefully give something back. I started Career Mark, and it's been going well.
Yeah. And so, how long have you been doing Career Mark for?
Started in March of 22, so just a little bit more than 2 years, 2.25 years.
Okay. And my first question out of curiosity is what are some of the things that you've seen starting Career Mark that kind of surprised you about the job search process? So I'm sure you obviously were super familiar with everything with your experience in when you before you were retired. And so what are some kind of key lessons, maybe top down that you could talk about just from your experience?
Yeah, so it's interesting because starting your own business, obviously, when you work for a mega corporation like J&J, everything's kind of there, right? You pick
Yeah.
up, you need to have a problem, you pick up the phone, somebody helps you. You need this, you call somebody, somebody helps you. When you start your own thing, you're on your own, and that was a pretty big eye opener for me in a variety of different ways, from either the finances or the backing or the support and the technology and all that sort of thing. But having said that, I think probably the biggest aha I had coming out of this is basically building the client base, and it's been basically word of mouth, which has been good. And we've built a lot of clients, through recommendations and people that know me or have worked with me, and it kind of dominoes from there. I thought I would have a little bit more traction working with universities, candidly, and for whatever reason, it feels like when I talk to them a little bit, it feels like a competition versus a compliment to what they do. So I haven't had a lot of traction there. So I've done some alternative things, working with different uh, advocacy groups around the country, as well as trying to post on LinkedIn and so forth. So I think the promotion and kind of marketing piece of Career Mark has probably not played out exactly like I thought it would. It's not a huge mess, but some of
Mhm.
the things that I counted on are not really coming to fruition, and things that maybe I didn't emphasize before, I'm emphasizing more now. But it's been a good run. It's just been a little different than maybe I anticipated back in March of 22.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I feel like there's two key huge industries that I see in the career consulting world where it's more early career. So you're helping out college students who maybe want to get an internship or maybe a first job out of undergrad. And then there's more executive searching. So it's, I would say, like, experienced hires, people who are 30 years in making a switch. Do you think there's any key differences in the process between those two candidates that you've kind of seen? And if so, like, can you touch on some of the key different things that you would give for maybe advice or strategies or whatnot?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think there's a couple of things that are very similar, regardless of where you are in your career journey, and then there's a few things that'll be different depending upon where you are in your career journey. So first, let me talk about the things that I think are similar, right? I think more often than not, when I work with a client, the biggest thing they're in need of is confidence. Uh,
Mm,
they have the skills and they have the ability, but they're not quite in a position to articulate it effectively through the interview process. Their resume isn't set up to capture somebody's attention, or one of the artificial intelligence bots that work on the job hosting site. So they're not real confident in what they need to do. Now that's can really happen whether you're early in your career journey or a little bit later in your career journey. Now, one of the differences is with the younger professionals, they're like a sponge. They've got, hey, tell me what I need to do. How do I need to do it? And I'll do my best to incorporate that and go from there. The more seasoned professional, a lot of times we're shaking off the rust, maybe breaking a few bad habits that they've gotten into relative to their own development and how they promoted themselves, down the line. And so we're working through that. So I think that's probably what I would say, regardless of where you are in your career journey, building confidence is crucial. and then being able to accept feedback and internalize it, and maybe kind of shake out of your comfort zone for some of the more tenured people. Those are some of the things that we work on most.
Yeah, and I like how you bring up the confidence part because just in the experience that I've seen, I think there's so many talented candidates out there, but they just need the confidence to say, "Listen, go in this direction, do these sorts of tasks," and having that like mentorship experience of like you actually telling them, "Well, listen, I've been in this business. This is what they're looking for," and with that confidence, they can really take the next step. So I feel like it's kind of an underappreciated thing. So I definitely like you touched on that, and I guess we can kind of get into some of the more popular topics in career development. So we can talk about resume writing. I know that's a huge industry, and so kind of run me through some key things that you think are prevalent and have been prevalent throughout your career. Maybe some changes in the in resume writing that you've seen, because I'm sure the market's evolved since 40, 30 years ago. And so kind of just run me through resume writing and some tactics.
Yeah, well, I think obviously the biggest change is everything's electronic now, right?
Yeah.
When I was starting, you made sure you had a really good resume. It was on good quality paper with, all that kind of stuff. It had to go be typeset, and it was it was an expensive process, quite frankly, to pull your resume together at that time. And obviously, with the advances in technology, that's really not a big deal whatsoever anymore. Now, having said that, things have kind of come full circle in the sense that for a while, resumes were getting fairly creative. And what I mean by that is somebody might have their picture on their resume. They have a lot of graphics and things of that nature, and that can grab someone's attention, which is great. But candidly, the way that the artificial intelligence bots are set up, the applicant tracking software, ATS, is maybe what you might read or hear about. They're set up to be most beneficial in a formatted, bullet pointed type of way. So when I see a resume now that's not that way, I want to encourage the client to think about, okay, we might need to reconfigure this just a little bit to make sure we get the attention of the bots. So I think that's probably one of the biggest changes I would say is going from a pure paper type of environment to a more electronic environment, and then navigating some of the technological challenges. I oftentimes encourage people not to include a picture on their resume for no other reason than you don't want to kind of prejudice the information itself. You want the paper to speak for itself, if you will, your qualifications to speak for themselves. And I would hate to have a client say, well, they're too young, they're too old, they're too this, they're too that. We don't necessarily need to look at that. Let's get them excited about what's on the resume, and then we'll tackle the rest of the stuff from there. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things I've seen in the evolution of the resume process, if you will. With respect to the actual do's and don'ts or things that I see, uh, you know, look, the resume is there to whet somebody's appetite, in my opinion. Some people might disagree with that, but it's there to let somebody say, "Oh, you know what? This is interesting. I'm intrigued. I want to get to know this person better. I really like what I'm seeing here. Let's reach out and talk to them." It's not really meant to be, chapter and verse of your entire life. And so oftentimes what I see is resumes that are too long, and again, that might skew to the professional who's been in their career journey for a little bit longer. So the length of it is um, sometimes a problem. And then another key mistake is just listing what you did versus what you accomplished. That seems kind of elementary, but it's true. You go and you look at a lot of resumes, and I did this, 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 and it just sorts to each continuing bullet point almost dilutes the one before it, as opposed to I did this, which resulted in that. Cause and effect. You go in there and say, look, I was given this responsibility and it yielded these results. And so one of the biggest things that I work through first with an individual is understanding the cause and effect of their experiences. And I ask a lot of questions when we start. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. Tell me more about this. What exactly did you do? And what you find is when you get into those conversations, all of a sudden, A, you see the client's confidence start to increase. But B, they're like, oh, I did this. Oh, you know what? And then I did this. And then all of a sudden, things that maybe aren't even on the resume, but could be relevant and differentiating now find their way onto the resume. So making sure the content is really important. And then the final piece, and this is, maybe a little bit complex, but I try to coach people around triangulating their value proposition. Namely, what's one of the first questions you get in an interview? Tell me about yourself, right? And so you'd be surprised. That's a subject that people should know the best, and they kind of, some people go in the ditch on that one, and that's unfortunate because basically that seals the deal for the rest of the interview. So we want to make sure that you've got that personal value proposition uh, solidified. Tell me about David. Well, I'm this, and this. Well, then that should be reflected in the resume. It's not necessarily a word for word recitation of what's on your resume, but when you get to your career objective, professional profile, if you will, what they have read should be reflected in what you're about to tell them about yourself. And then the third part of the triangle is incorporating those behaviors, those transferable skills that are unique to you into the context of your interview answers. And at CareerMark, I think those are a couple of the things that we've done that I think the clients have gotten the greatest amount of value in. And it does increase their confidence because when they can see a clear connection between what I'm bringing to the party, what's on my resume, and how I'm going to answer it in an interview, you start to see that person just their body language suggests a higher degree of confidence.
Yeah. There's so many great bits of information just in that. Three things I want to touch on. Well, first, on the resume writing, I think that's so important with people trying to explain everything that they've done and not focusing on the accomplishments. Like I've seen resumes, like as you're probably like thinking of, 5 pages long, where it's just everything they did. They're from the time management to this to that. And I think just having a good focused angle on what they accomplished and having that just be kind of like a lead magnet, like it's your getting intrigued as the employer or the hiring manager or whatnot to talk to them more about their resume rather than just saying this is the end all be all. I'm going to use this to display every single bit of my career entirely. And so definitely like we were saying about that. And another thing I had a question about was for someone who doesn't know what ATS is, applicant tracking systems, how would you explain that? And then what's kind of the importance of that in the modern hiring process?
Yeah, okay, it's a good question. And this has really become very relevant in the last several years. So, applicant tracking software is basically software that a ZipRecruiter, Indeed, and so forth would use when a company is looking for a prospective new hire. And so it's going to be, and trust me when I say I don't want to come out that I'm the expert on all things ATS. I'm not. I've done enough research and seen enough things to at least speak a little bit on it. And essentially, David, what it boils down to is the software is built to look for keywords and phrases. So when you think about, building a resume that can get attracted by the bots, well, then what do I need to do? Well, let me go look at a couple jobs that I might be interested in, and then when you go into the description of the job, it'll call out certain behaviors and characteristics and things that they're looking for. Well, then my resume should hold some of those words and phrases within the context of that as well. So for people that are going into potentially a sales type of role, and you go in and you read the qualifications. They want somebody who's competitive, who is, organizes and plans themselves well. They're analytical. Well, those are things that we would want to tease out in the resume as well. So when the search engine is looking for those keywords, your resume is going to get captured.
Yeah. And why do you think these huge companies are having ATS systems nowadays? And some of the answers I've seen are, well, because now there's a lower barrier to entry to how many people can apply to these jobs. Like I know LinkedIn now has the easy apply feature where someone could apply in literally 30 seconds. And I'm sure, years ago it was you'd actually have to go to the company to, I'm assuming you just submit your resume. It's more of an actual process rather than just 3 seconds of clicking. And so why do you think these companies are having this system go through?
Well, I think I don't know for a fact, but if you're just my opinion is there, it's allowing them to cast their net as wide as possible in a short period of time.
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
post a job on any number of websites, put it out basically across the country, across the world for that matter. And then people can find it. And that's a heck of a lot easier than job fairs and all those sorts of things, which still happen. And those are still very, really good vehicles to find an opportunity. But I think the biggest thing is, speed to impact.
Mhm.
Time is money. We don't want jobs open for months and months and months. So if we can get the word out quickly through these job hosting sites, then scan and get who knows countless resumes submitted, get the bots to track the ones that they deem to be most qualified, and then turn it over to the recruiting personnel to vet those, and then get down to a handful of candidates that we can actually work through. I think that's pretty much the biggest thing is around efficiency.
Yeah. And then another huge area of career development I want to talk about is kind of interview prep. And so I know that that's huge and really important, especially depending on the industry you're going into. And you can speak more on this than me. What are some things that you kind of teach in the strategies for interview prep? And I know this is kind of different depending on the jobs you're going into, but what are some standard practices that you see and that you teach at CareerMark?
Yeah. So I think the big thing When I coach clients around interview preparation is you've got to know yourself and you've got to know the company you're interviewing with. And I'll hit the first one first. So we already talked about what is your personal value proposition? What are you bringing to the party? What's unique about you that would make a prospective employer want to get to know you better? So you need to know yourself. You need to know your strengths, your experiences very well, your skills, your competencies. I also, and I put a big premium on this, what are your gaps? Everybody can talk a long time about what they're great at, but it's only, a small subset of people that can actually talk about, their gaps, their developmental areas confidently and succinctly and allow them to mitigate those gaps. So again, part of that is preparation. You got to know kind of what your strengths are, where my deficits might be, and how will I attack those and approach those in the interview setting. So know yourself as best and what you're good at and what you're not so good at as best you can. The second piece is knowing the company. What do they do? How do they do it? Who are their competitors? There's so much stuff online that you can find that I think is exceptionally valuable. And I always put a lot of stock in a candidate that showed that they had prepared by learning more about Johnson and Johnson when they were coming to interview with me, because I couldn't help but extrapolate that that's the type of preparation they're going to put into their work. So when I would see somebody who basically was very top line, not very deep in what their knowledge was about what we were and what we did, didn't really make a lot of positive impact on me. However, when that person was able to say, well, you know what, I saw this and I know you've got competitors in this market and you've got this coming down the line, that made me feel a lot more comfortable that this is the type of effort they're going to put into the job themselves. So from a interview preparation standpoint, the couple three things I really put a lot of focus on is know yourself, know the company that you're interviewing for, what they do and how they do it, what makes them successful. And once you've got those couple three things done, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And then the other key area I want to touch on is kind of the role of networking. And so I think that people talk a lot now about, you should really try to find someone who can give you that referral, that inside information, whatever the strategies that I hear about talked about every day. And so what do you think the role of networking is in the modern job process? And then if it's so important, then what are some steps you can go about that for actually going out there and meeting people at these companies and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's vital. Like, as much as we talk about the computers and the bots and all those sorts of things, like we still are going to work with human beings in almost every job, and you're going to need to interact and have positive relationships with other folks as well. So I think networking is essential, and I look at it in two different ways. I think way one is people that can help me find a job, and way two is people that can support me once I'm in the job. And I think that's it's a little bit of a nuance there, but it's an important distinction. So first and foremost, the networking piece. I often coach clients around, when they're looking for work. Your job is to now find a job, right? And so you have to attack that with the same tenacity that you would attack your work. And what does that mean? That means, uncovering as much as you can about anybody who's out there that can help me get connected and so forth. So, putting yourself out there on things like LinkedIn and the open to work hashtag and things, well, that certainly helps. Joining different groups around the country that might be in the discipline that you're pursuing, that might be able to, point you in the right direction for job fairs and so forth. One that I have worked with for a number of years at J&J and have worked a little bit with since I started careermarc is a group called the National Sales Network. And essentially it was started to help individuals, generally people of color, crack into the sales industry. But it's expanded over the years. And it's really for anybody. And they do a really nice job of having local chapters, and then they have national conferences and things of that nature. And that is a huge networking opportunity where you can meet people, and you might not be able to, this person might not be able to help you, but they know somebody who knows somebody that can help you and so forth. So I think networking is an extremely important part of the puzzle, and doing it correctly and making sure that you're being thoughtful about it and getting the right contacts is huge. Now, the other piece is, what do I do once I'm in the job and I might want to get promoted and things of that nature, right? And what I've learned over the years is, leading by example only gets you so far. You might be a very good employee and you might lead by example and do everything that's asked of you and then some. But if you don't have sponsorship at higher levels to support you in conversations when they're talking about succession planning, promotions, and so forth, you're going to have a rough go of it. So building that internal network. and finding people that will sponsor you and people that will talk for you when you're not in the room. That's a really important piece of the puzzle. In my experience at J&J, it's almost like you can see a light bulb go off over somebody's head when you had that conversation. People like, God, I'm just working my butt off. I'm not getting anywhere. I don't understand it. So and so got promoted. I know I'm better than them. And it's like, okay, well, you know what so and so does very well is they make sure that people know what they're doing and how they're doing it. I don't want to be a show off. I don't want to toot my own horn. Well, I get it. But you know what? If you don't toot your own horn every once in a while, it's going to be pretty quiet. So you need to kind of,
Yeah.
find that happy medium between being boastful, being brash, and being confident and being smart about navigating your career. And when you're building that internal network and finding those people who will sponsor you when an opportunity comes along, that's a crucial part of the puzzle.
Yeah. And I could definitely speak, kind of transitioning to another aspect I want to talk about of getting promoted and rising through the ranks of a company. I think, especially because, I'm in college, I know a lot of the people that I'm friends with, they do not think about, well, okay, after I get the job, then I actually have to work at this company and then I actually do have to rise through the ranks. I know a lot of people, at least my friends and whatnot, are just thinking about how can I get the job and not thinking after that. But I think it'd be helpful, especially even for people at my level and my age, to kind of give some key tips on what they should be looking for, one in company culture, and then because I know that's a huge thing that no one talks about, but then once you actually get into the job, what are some steps that they should be doing, maybe right off the bat, maybe in the first couple months, to actually put a good foot forward and rise through the company in first couple of years or whatnot.
Yeah. That's really important. So, I think, at J&J, we called it the recruiting and selection process. We didn't call it the hiring process. So we're trying to recruit the best people. We're going to try to select the best people. And one of the things I coach to as a consultant now is that as much as they are recruiting you and interviewing you, you should be interviewing them as it pertains to how good of a fit this is going to be for you personally. And so, look, a lot of times, like, I just want to get a job. I got to get a job, and then we'll just see what happens from there. And I get it. I really do. My first job was selling copy machines. And, did I plan on doing that forever? I did not, but buddy, I knew I needed to get a job. And so I didn't have as put a huge premium on company culture and all that. I needed a paycheck. And I understand that. But to that point, though, we all have this internal compass that we need to work off of. And so, as you're interviewing with a company and you're asking them questions, you're learning more about what they do. I think it's really important for you to sit back and say, okay, does this sound like something that would fit with me philosophically? Or am I going to be asked to do things that are in my, kind of value set versus things that might make me a little uncomfortable from a values perspective and so forth? So, as much as you're being interviewed, you should look at this company as well to say, okay, they line up with kind of my internal compass and is there going to be a good fit there? Okay, so I think that's an important piece. Now, once that job happens, a lot of bigger companies will have some sort of mentoring program set up, but most won't. And so it's really incumbent upon you. One of the things I used to coach all of my folks around is that the person who is most responsible for your personal development is you, plain and simple. And so while you might have a great boss and they're going to do everything that they can to help you, they have other things to do. So you have to take it upon yourself to maximize your own personal development. And that could be finding a mentor. Now, having your direct supervisors and mentors is probably not a good thing, in my opinion, because that could breed a certain level of complexity as it pertains to other employees and so forth. But go into your direct supervisor, say, who might I want to, kind of learn the ropes from? Who should I, kind of buddy up with and see what they can do to help me kind of assimilate and get up to speed quickly and start to excel in this role. That's a huge part of the puzzle is to identify a mentor and establish a working relationship within that context. And then the other piece of the puzzle is, when you get in that role, be observant. Look at things and say, okay, you know what? I like what you can learn from everybody. I like what this person does. I'm not so crazy about that, and then you can start to internalize the things that you see are having impact that are successful, and you start to espouse those in your own conversations with fellow employees and how you're presenting yourself in certain situations. And all of a sudden, then it's going to look like you're truly buying in to the corporate culture and that you're assimilating to what they value and that you're going to have those values and carry them forward.
Yeah. And touching on the idea of finding a mentor, because I think that's something I could speak, especially from my friends that I have and people that I've met, especially at my age. finding a mentor is like a huge topic. And so, what are some strategies you think? Because I know, like, you go out there, you talk to someone, do you want to be my mentor? But what is actually a good way to go about that transaction? Because, and I have my own thoughts on this. I'm sure you do as well. But what are some good ways to actually go about finding a mentor and having a meaningful relationship as mentorship?
Yeah, at first, I think the big hurdle, David, is to find the right mentor, right? And there might be certain people that are very successful, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest one of my direct reports reach out to them to be a mentor. It might be working for them, but I don't know that there's alignment here with what you're about and what they're about, how you do things, how they do things. So picking the right person, I think, is a big part of that puzzle, and that could include things around you know style fit, things around your career progression, where you want to go and who's doing those jobs that you want to head towards. And then there could be some things from background and experience. And so, for example, um, I wish I was smart enough to figure this out on my own, but I wasn't. But I was working with a bright young guy, an African American person, and promoted him to manager. So he went from individual contributor to team leader, and he was from a blue collar background. His father was a barber, and he uh, went to college on a sports scholarship, and got on with J&J and it was doing well. But he was one of those folks. I don't understand. I'm doing everything you're asking me to do, and then it kind of had a little mini epiphany for me that, okay, you know what, this individual is doing the best they can, but they're kind of playing with one eye shut. They're not aware of all the different things that we can do. And so I offered up the opportunity to find some mentors and people of color that had gone through the management process at Johnson and Johnson, and say, look, would you be willing to reach out to this individual and help them learn the ropes from your shared experience and so forth? Because as much as he worked for me and I wanted to support him, our backgrounds were very different. And I felt it was important for that individual to find somebody else who had a similar path. So finding the right mentor is an important piece of the puzzle. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. Once you found that person, well, then how do I go about kind of asking for that relationship to start and sponsorship? It's not terribly, you know, uncommon to the, asking somebody out for a first date or something, right? You meet somebody, you think there's a little bit of a click, and eventually you just have to have the guts to, hey, you want to go out to dinner or something? I think what you would find, at least in the business sense, overwhelmingly, people are going to welcome that opportunity. Number one, you think enough of me to think that I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I'll be happy to help. Number two, it's like, yeah, I want to give back. I had mentors along the way as well. So, very few people, David, get to a point where they're super successful without having somebody help. And so I think to that point, most of us who have achieved some modicum of success in our careers are more than happy to return the favor and identify younger employees with capabilities and talents and serve as a mentor to them outside of their line management. And that's an important piece of the puzzle too, because, you know, you will ask this individual things that you might not want to ask your boss. You'll share things with this individual you might not want to share with your boss, and it's all for the good of your progression. But that's a little bit of a delicate balance as well. So finding that right person, establishing that trust, and it's a big part of the puzzle.
Yeah. 100%. And I think I've said this now on almost every podcast, but I feel like what surprises me the most is how willing people are to help you out if you actually go out there and put yourself out there. Whether it's this podcast, whether it's job toast, and you definitely seen this, throughout your career. People are really willing to help, and I think people don't see it that way, and they think people are safeguarding the secrets. But the majority of the people I've spoken with, obviously, there's people who won't, but the majority of the people I've spoken with are super willing to help for anything for this podcast, for job toast, and so that's what surprised me the most, and it's a good surprise to have. So, another transition I wanted to make was to go over your career and just kind of give me some key highlights on, because I know you were at J&J for a while. So, kind of what was the progression of the career? And you said you started out with a different job, and so yeah, I just want to hear the more, I guess, a bullet point version of your resume.
Sure, yeah. So like I said, I got out of college and I started selling copy machines, which back in the mid 80s, that was, the I don't want to say an easy thing to get into, but there were a lot of opportunities there. and the office equipment thing was exploding. So I did that for a couple years. Crazy enough, my roommate's girlfriend's grandmother recruited for J&J. And she's like, "Hey, you want to interview in this and that?" And so, I said, "Okay, yeah, let me see what's what." And one thing led to another, and I wound up getting a job as a sales rep here in Dallas. And then over the next many years, I did a lot of moves. And once I got in the job, I liked it. Then I saw what my manager was doing. I said, "Well, I could do that." And so I put myself in the management training program and was able to get promoted to team leader, district manager after 4 years. And that I went from Dallas to Memphis as a rep and then to Cincinnati. And then after 4 years in that role, I thought, well, I could do this home office thing, I think. And I interviewed for that. I got into a marketing capacity and did that for a couple years. And then our company was expanding and I was able to get promoted to regional director. And I moved back to Dallas and that was great. And after a couple years in that role, I was actually offered the opportunity to be a national sales director. So me and two colleagues ran a sales force of 1,000 people um, for our GI products for Janssen Pharmaceutica at that time. And then, as luck would have it, because my career was going very well, I'm moving all over the place. But as luck and life would have it, uh, my boss at the time, who wound up becoming the CEO of Johnson and Johnson, a gentleman named Alex Gorski, he was my boss at this time. And he said, "Look, we need to move your job back into the home office." And I'd already moved 4 times, and we had kind of put down roots here, and we had some other family stuff going on. So I made the decision to stay in Dallas and went back to being a regional director. And I wound up doing that job in a variety of different operating companies within Johnson and Johnson for the last 17, 18 years of my career. But it was a great run. Had a lot of good experiences, saw the world, did a lot of fun things with that. And I think the key to my success, at the risk of being boastful, which is not my intent, but working as hard as I could in the job I had, building that network of support for people to support me when the different opportunities came on, and then when I got that new job, focusing on that new job. When I was in the home office, especially, it's like, well, you're doing a good job. You're really focused, on your work. And I thought, well, okay, that seems kind of basic. They said, well, you don't realize that some people have an eye on this job and then they have an eye on their next job, and that shows. And so that was really good tutelage for me to say, okay, you know what? My time will come if I build my sponsorship base, but also show that I'm 100% dedicated to the role that I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny in the professional sports leagues, I hear everyone talking about how there's like no loyalty to the teams anymore, and I'm starting to see a similar thing with the job search process where I see people jumping from company to company. And I think it's honestly like a beautiful thing to see someone who stayed with one company for most of their career. And so, what would you say is the importance of staying with one company? I know you said within the company you moved around a bunch, but do you think that's something that people should consider more often? What are the benefits? Like, what are some trends that you've seen with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And there were pros and cons to what I did. And so I think, one of the pros was, I was with this great company, I had all these different opportunities. I was compensated well. The benefits were great. They stood by me in tough times on different things that obviously are going to come up over the course of 30 years. And, you build your lifelong, relationships with people and things of that nature. J&J at the time has a pension, which very few companies have. So that was obviously a drawing card to stay with where you were. Now, having said all that, look, honestly, the best way to increase your income is to change jobs, change companies. My value as an RBD at a regional business director at J&J was here. And I know that if I wanted to, I could go and take my salary up to here by going to another company because of my experience and my success and my expertise and the things that I've learned at J&J would have a higher level of value somewhere else. So, I think for me, it worked. And for several of my colleagues that had long, long careers at J&J, it was the right thing to do. But having said that, I know other people who have left and gone on to very spectacular careers on their own outside of J&J. So it's really a function of, what's going to make you happy. And I think that's a huge part of the puzzle, personally and professionally. And then, am I willing to take some of these chances? Because not everybody who left, by the way, landed on their feet. They get in
Mhm.
with something and then they're the last person in, the first one out when things go south. So there's always
Yeah.
some risk and reward there as well. But I think the longevity thing worked for me. And I was able to move and move and move. And, I was very career focused, especially in the first 10 to 12 years of my time with J&J. And that paid off. But it's not the only way. So what I would say to anybody is, like, think about, I used to like to encourage people to think about things in 5 to 7 year segments. Where are you now? Where would you like to be in 5 to 7 years?
Mhm.
And if that's possible, if where you want to be is going to work here, well, then let's put the pedal to the metal and make that happen. If you all of a sudden you realize, well, maybe that's not going to work here, then maybe it is better to start looking for something else. So and I think, let's be frank, a lot of companies now, when they decide that they need to make some changes, they do. And
Mhm.
there's layoffs and there's restructuring and reorganization. So, you know, I think companies generally try to do right by their employees. I think employees generally try to do right by their company, and loyalty is a part of that puzzle. But let's be frank, it's business,
Yeah.
and if the company decides that we don't need this many people here or there, that's going to happen. And you need to be prepared, because sometimes it's not about your performance. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you're going to need to start looking for something else. So again, I understand your question. I think it makes a lot of sense. There is some value to grinding it out at one company, but it's not the only path, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I just thought it was an interesting thing that just wanted to touch on. And then you kind of brought up something that I want to speak about, which is, we have a lot of good tactics that I think we spoke about once you know which job you want to go after. But what would be some advice to someone who, yeah, it's probably more prevalent at my age, at the college level, but what would be your advice to someone who doesn't even know what career they want to get into? They're looking at all the options. How do they make a decision on which path to go down to?
Well, I'll give you kind of my gut, and then I'll give you a little tool that can help. Um, I think my gut is, look, I was a broadcasting major, and I thought, okay, I want to be a sportscaster or whatever. And as I was interviewing for opportunities coming right out of school, uh, weekend and night photographer in Tupelo, Mississippi, or Cedar Rapids, Iowa, for $11,000 a year. Even in 1985, that was not a lot of money. So I had to
Yeah.
decide, do I really have this burning passion to be a broadcaster, or would I rather eat and keep a roof over my head? And so I chose the latter. And I had a friend who was in copier sales, and that's what I did. So I think for somebody like yourself and your peers, what would you enjoy? What would you make you happy? You're not probably going to get the perfect job right out of the chute. I get that. But as long as you're in something that kind of feeds you beyond the compensation piece, I think that's important. And how do I go about doing that? Well, here's the resource I was going to share with you. Um, a lot of people have heard of Gallup surveys. They do a lot of surveys here and there. They have a tool called the Strengths Finder, and it's been a while, but I think it's about $100. And you take this test with these really kind of random type of questions that are nonsensical. But then it comes back and it spits out this sequence of strengths 1 through 34. Now, the goal is not to make 34 number 10 or something. It's just kind of like, this is who I am and this is what I'm about. And so when I did my strengths finder, and this was well into my career, but it answered a lot of questions for me. And so what it found out that was competition, communication, adaptability, positivity, and decisiveness were my top 5 strengths. Well, that's probably why I liked my job,
Yeah.
because it was competitive every day. I got to collaborate and communicate with people. I set the tone for the region with my, positive attitude. I was able to adapt to different things coming down the line, and I was able to be decisive when I needed to be decisive. So it might be not a bad idea for folks your age to explore this Gallup Strength Finder and see, because I'll use my 2 daughters as an example. One, hers came out very similar to mine: communication, collaboration, competition, and she's going to be going down a sales staffing path. My older daughter took it and she scored really high on communication, empathy, responsibility, and things of that nature. She's a social worker.
Mhm.
And my point is, they're finding fields that align with how they're wired. I am not the most analytical person in the world, and it was one of my bottom 5. Now, I had to use analytics to be successful, and I used that in the spirit of competition. If I analyze this and get a better edge, that's what I'm going to do. But to have a job for me that required a lot of data analysis, data entry, and a lot of repetitive tasks was not going to work for me. So I think for somebody of in your peer group, that's probably a pretty decent investment to say, okay, let me take this Gallup Strengths Finder. Let me see what my top 5 or 10 strengths are. And then, okay, what kind of job would fit nicely with those behaviors? And then if that happens, then you'll probably find a lot more alignment in what you want to do.
Yeah. I feel like we've touched on a lot of great things over the podcast, and so I wanted to make sure I didn't leave anything out. So, is there any major pieces of advice, whether it's from CareerMark or from J&J, that you would like to share with the audience? Keeping in mind that these most of the audience is probably people looking for opportunities or obviously looking to scale up within their current opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I guess 2 things. Flexibility is huge. Being, not getting too entrenched in any one particular path or position. I think that is really, really important. Um, 2 other things that I learned, these will come from my time at J&J. Be open to new experiences, and that kind of goes with the flexibility. But you might be on a certain career path, and then an opportunity comes up in an area where you're like, you know what, that's not really where I saw myself going next. But if you think about it, because if you gain expertise in that particular area, it might help you with accelerating to another 2 jobs down the line. And one of our old presidents called it broadening your organizational DNA. The more you know about the organization, the more different departments you might be able to work in, I think is important. The other one, this came from my closest mentor at J&J, was don't look at things tomorrow as they are today. Things change. You know, Jobs today might not be there tomorrow. New jobs might present themselves. So what does that mean? Well, that means I better really work to develop myself and have the best image, reputation, and results I can possibly have. So if that new job opens up and it's perfect for what I want to do, I'm prepared to compete for it. So I think that would be, the big things I would take away. Don't look at things tomorrow as they are today. Build out your organizational DNA and be flexible because you never know where it's going to take you.